Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating analysis by Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa Al-Hammadi. You know, we hear so much about conflicts on the news, but today we're actually looking past the physical battlefield to examine the ongoing ideological war over the true meaning of Islam and how modern nations are attempting to combat extremism right from the ground up.
Right off the bat, the source text hits us with a huge question. Is the massive global conflict we see constantly on our feeds truly just about territory? Or is there something deeper going on? A profound, high-stakes struggle over the actual definition of the religion itself? The author argues it's totally the latter. It's not just about geography, it's a fight for the very identity of the faith. Okay, to unpack this, we're going to look at four main areas today. First, the battle to define the religion. Second, the roots of takfiri groups. Third, how different models confront extremism. And finally, a vision for peace and coexistence. Let's get right to it.
All right, Section 1, the battle to define religion.
So the text makes a crucial point here. To truly understand today's geopolitical landscape, you have to realize there isn't just one single monolithic view at play. Instead, there are two totally opposing narratives duking it out for dominance. On one hand, you have the clash narrative. This one essentially hijacks the religion to push violence, confrontation, and exclusion. But on the flip side, there's the Quranic narrative, which is actively fighting to restore a foundation of universal mercy, peace, cooperation, and coexistence. It is literally an ideological tug-of-war happening as we speak.
Moving on to Section 2, the roots of takfiri groups.
Now this is where it gets super interesting. The author uses Indonesia's history to trace where these exclusionary or takfiri ideologies actually come from. Basically, takfiri is the practice of declaring other Muslims as apostates just to justify violence against them. If we look back, in 1940 and 1945, Indonesia purposely chose a pluralistic civil state model with its Pancasila constitution. But almost immediately in 1948, this violent group called Dar al-Islam popped up to fight that pluralism. And this ideological clash, it just simmered for decades until it finally boiled over into those devastating terror attacks we saw in the early 2000s in Bali and against local churches. They were directly targeting the very idea of coexistence.
And the source lays out how this wasn't just an isolated issue in Asia or the Middle East. It blew up into a massive global crisis. The Afghan war basically acted like a giant, dangerous mixing bowl. It was this crazy meeting point where local extremist groups from Indonesia, Egypt, Pakistan, and Bangladesh all crashed together. This exact convergence is what morphed isolated local groups into Al-Qaeda and those huge borderless terror networks we recognize today. They essentially swapped their local complaints for a global exclusionary agenda.
Which brings us to Section 3, models of confronting extremism. So how have modern states actually dealt with this deeply rooted ideological threat? The text points out three very different but totally complementary approaches. You've got Egypt, who went the route of direct armed confrontation, paying a really heavy price to physically dismantle these groups. Then there's Indonesia, focusing on fiercely protecting its pluralistic civil model from these transnational networks. Meanwhile, the UAE took on what the author calls the battle of awareness. They went all in on actively countering hate speech and systematically promoting tolerance to offer a civilized alternative. Three distinct angles, all chasing the exact same goal.
But seeing the sheer global scale of this problem, the author asks a pretty critical question here. Can these deeply entrenched extremist beliefs actually be reversed? Like, is it even possible to change a radicalized mind?
Well, check out this number, 2,750. According to the analysis, back in 2012, Indonesia launched a 4-year dialogue program right inside their prisons. They literally sat down with 3,000 extremist leaders and individuals, and through intense, rigorous intellectual debate, 2,750 of them were successfully de-radicalized and guided back to a peaceful understanding of their faith. That's a massive success rate.
This data points to a huge takeaway from this explainer. Military confrontation? Sure, it's sometimes necessary, like we saw in Egypt, but it is just not enough on its own. To dismantle extremism permanently, you need this rigorous, sustained battle of awareness. You've got to do the heavy intellectual lifting to actually replace that extremist ideology with the correct, peaceful interpretations. Basically, you have to win the mind, not just the battlefield.
All right, final part, Section 4, a vision for peace and coexistence.
To lock in long-term stability, the author's work, which is backed by institutions like the Universal Message of Peace Foundation, pushes one major strategy, going straight back to the original Quranic texts.
The idea here is to completely bypass centuries of manipulated, twisted interpretations. By returning to the source, the Foundation's goal is to rip out takfiri violence right at its very roots. And a super fascinating detail the author points out is what happens when you actually return to those original texts. The true interpretation is heavily focused on respect for other faiths. In fact, the text explicitly points out how the Quran honors Christian figures, specifically Jesus and the Virgin Mary. By putting a spotlight on this unity among divine messages, it absolutely crushes any ideological, textual justification for violence against other religions. I mean, it literally pulls the rug right out from under the extremist core arguments.
Which perfectly sets up the author's central argument. When it's understood correctly, Islam is actually a powerful force for peace, stability, and security. The ultimate shield against global terrorism isn't just about stronger borders, policies, or better weapons. The real shield is a correct, pluralistic understanding of the religion, actively protected and promoted by the state itself. When the state champions the right narrative, the whole world is safer.
The text wraps up by suggesting that the massive sacrifices made by nations like Egypt, the UAE, and Indonesia over the decades haven't just kept their own borders safe, they've actually shielded the entire world from a much darker reality. They've proven that this ideological battle can be won, offering us a genuine horizon of peace.
So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, straight from the source material. We've seen these successful models of de-radicalization. We've seen firsthand how the battle of awareness works. Moving forward, is the global community going to step up, adopt these lessons, and actively collaborate? Or are we just going to look away and allow a dangerous void to remain? Because trust me, exclusionary extremism is always waiting to fill that gap. It's a critical choice for sure, and understanding this material is the first big step. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always,
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.